My true story from Gainesville, Florida. My own son abused me on my sick bed. What I did to destroy him will shock you more than what he did to me. I'm 78 years old, sitting here in my kitchen in Gainesville, Florida, where I raised that boy as a single mother, where I packed thousands of school lunches with love, where I celebrated every achievement and cried over every disappointment. For 10 years I've kept quiet about the darkest chapter of my life. How my own flesh and blood used my paralysis to abuse me in ways no mother should ever experience, ways that still make my hands shake when I think about them. A 73-year-old woman, left side completely paralyzed from a massive stroke, unable to speak clearly, unable to move, unable to escape. Completely dependent on the son she'd sacrificed everything to raise. The son she'd worked double shifts at the textile factory to put through college. The son who looked everyone in the eye and convinced them he was the perfect caregiver. The devoted boy making sacrifices for his disabled mama. But behind closed doors, when there were no witnesses, when I was trapped in my own body, that's when the real James Jr. revealed himself. That's when the boy I'd loved unconditionally became my worst nightmare, using my helplessness as his opportunity, my love for him as his weapon against me. Last week, he showed up at my door thin, sickly, desperate, begging for help like the pathetic creature he'd become. And what I told him, the words that made this grown man collapse in tears on my doorstep, will give you chills. Because, sweethearts, after years of planning, after years of building my case, I'd finally found the perfect way to make him pay. Welcome back to Granny Dorothy's Stories. Before I share how I got my revenge on the child I once loved more than life itself, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I love hearing from my sweethearts around the world. Your support truly encourages me to keep sharing these incredible tales, so if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. What you're about to hear happens in homes across America right now. Behind closed doors, in families that seem perfect from the outside. This isn't just a story about abuse. This is about how a helpless 73-year-old woman outsmarted a predator, destroyed his life completely, and made sure he'll never hurt another vulnerable person again. This is about how the weakest person in the room became the most dangerous, how a mother's love turned into a mother's fury, and how patience and planning can deliver justice when the system fails you. My name is Martha Williams, and this is how I went from victim to the woman who brought my own son to his knees. This is how I turned my greatest shame into my greatest victory. The boy I raised to be a good man became a monster when I needed him most. But monsters should never underestimate what happens when a mother decides she's taken enough, when she's got nothing left to lose, and when she's had years to plan the perfect payback. What I'm about to tell you will change how you think about family, about trust, about the evil that can hide behind a caregiver's smile. But more importantly, it will show you that it's never too late to fight back, never too late to get justice, and never too late to make someone pay for what they've stolen from you. Let me start at the beginning, because understanding how much I loved that boy, how much I sacrificed for him, that's crucial to understanding the magnitude of what he took from me. I was 19 years old when I found out I was pregnant. 19, working as a waitress at Murphy's Diner here in Gainesville, dreaming of maybe going to college someday, maybe becoming a teacher. James Sr. was 21, handsome as sin, and full of promises about the life we'd build together. We'd been dating for 8 months, talking about marriage, making plans for a future that seemed so bright and possible. But the moment I told him about the baby, everything changed. James Sr. looked at me like I'd just ruined his entire life. "I'm not ready for this," he said, backing away from me like I was contagious. "I'm too young to be a father. This isn't what I planned." He left town 3 days later, packed up his car in the middle of the night, and disappeared like our 8 months together had meant nothing, like the child we'd created was just an inconvenience he could run away from. I never saw him again, never heard from him again. I was 19, pregnant, and completely alone in a small Georgia town in 1966, when being an unwed mother was still a scandal that could destroy your reputation forever. My parents were devastated, sweethearts. Not because they didn't love me, but because they knew how hard life was going to be for me and their grandchild. This was 1966 in small-town Georgia, where good girls didn't get pregnant before marriage, where single mothers were whispered about and looked down upon. But my mama, God rest her soul, she wrapped her arms around me and said, "Well, honey, we'll just have to make the best of it. This baby is going to be loved whether it has a daddy or not." James Jr. was born on February 14, 1967. Valentine's Day. The moment I saw his little face, the moment I felt his tiny fingers wrap around mine, I knew that everything I'd been through was worth it. He was perfect, absolutely perfect, with dark hair like mine and these huge brown eyes that seemed to see straight into my soul. I worked in the textile factory here in Gainesville, standing at those machines all day, the noise so loud you couldn't think, the air thick with cotton dust that made your lungs burn. Every penny I earned went to making sure James Jr. had what he needed. I'd get up at 5 in the morning to get ready for my shift, drop him off at Mama's house by 6, work until 3, pick him up, and spend the evening playing with him, reading to him, making sure he knew he was the most important thing in my world. I went without everything, sweethearts. New clothes, nights out with friends, vacations, anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. When other women my age were dating and dancing and living the carefree lives of young people, I was working overtime to pay for James Jr.'s shoes, his school supplies, and his Christmas presents. When he needed a winter coat, I wore my old one for another year. When he wanted to join Little League, I worked double shifts to pay for his uniform and equipment. But I didn't mind, not one bit. Looking at that little boy, seeing his face light up when I came home from work, hearing him call me Mama in that sweet voice, it made every sacrifice worth it. I was building something beautiful, raising a good man, creating a future that would justify all the hardship. The church community here in Gainesville helped as much as they could. First Baptist wasn't judgmental about my situation the way some places might have been. Pastor Williams, no relation to us, just happened to have the same last name. He made sure we felt welcome, made sure James Jr. had male role models in the congregation, made sure we never felt like outcasts. Sunday dinners at church became our social life. James Jr. would run around the fellowship hall with the other children, while the ladies cleaned up the kitchen and planned the next church social. The men would ruffle his hair and ask about school, treating him like he belonged, like he mattered just as much as the children who had fathers at home. I built my entire identity around being his mother, sweethearts. Everything I did, every decision I made, every dream I had for the future, it all centered around that boy. I was Martha Williams, James Jr.'s mama, the woman who worked harder than anyone to give her son the best life possible. Teachers always said he was a polite, respectful boy. No one ever complained about him at school. He made good grades, participated in church activities, and helped elderly neighbors with their yard work. Everyone in town knew James Jr. Williams was that nice boy whose mama worked so hard to raise him right. I was so proud, so incredibly proud of the man he was becoming. Every sacrifice I made was for his future. I went without new clothes, without vacations, without anything for myself so he could go to college and have the life I never had. I had a mason jar hidden in my bedroom closet, and every extra dollar went into that jar. College fund, I called it. James Jr.'s ticket to a better life than mine. When he graduated high school as valedictorian, I cried like a baby sitting in that auditorium. Watching him walk across that stage, hearing his name called out with honors, knowing that all those years of sacrifice had led to this moment, it was the proudest day of my life. He was going to Georgia State University on a partial scholarship, and my jar had enough saved to cover the rest. "Mama," he said to me that night, hugging me tight after the graduation party, "I'm going to make you proud. I'm going to become somebody important, and then I'm going to take care of you the way you've taken care of me." I believed him, sweethearts. I believed every word. Looking back now, I think it was precisely this excessive love that ended up spoiling him, that made him think he could do anything and I would always forgive him. I never said no to that boy, never made him face real consequences for his mistakes, never taught him that other people's needs mattered as much as his own. I thought I was showing him love, but maybe I was teaching him that he was the center of the universe and everyone else existed to serve his wants and needs. When he came home from college for visits, something had changed. He would look at me differently, speak to me like I was a burden instead of the mother who'd given him everything. He'd make comments about the house being too small, about how embarrassing it was to bring friends home to such a modest place. He'd criticize my clothes, my job, my lack of education, like he'd forgotten where he came from and who had made his fancy college life possible. When I graduate and get a good job, he'd tell me, we're going to have to do something about your situation. You can't live like this forever. Like my life was some kind of emergency that needed fixing, instead of the life I'd built through my own hard work and determination. I made excuses for his behavior, told myself it was just college stress, that he was growing up and developing his own opinions about things. I convinced myself that his criticism came from love, that he wanted better for me just like I'd always wanted better for him. If you've ever felt that something was wrong with your own child but couldn't quite name it, you'll understand what came next. There's something particularly heartbreaking about watching the child you raised with such love and hope become someone you don't recognize, someone who treats you like you're worthless. But I pushed those feelings down, told myself I was being too sensitive, that I should be grateful he was successful and educated and making something of himself. I should have listened to those warning signs. I should have recognized that the boy I'd raised was becoming a man who felt entitled to take whatever he wanted, including from the mother who'd given him everything. It was a Thursday morning in 2009, October 15th. I remember the date exactly because it's burned into my memory like a scar that never fades. I was getting ready for work. I was 65 then, still working at the textile factory because I couldn't afford to retire yet. James Jr. had graduated from college with his business degree and was working in Atlanta, making good money, but somehow he never seemed to have enough to help his mama who'd sacrificed everything for his education. I was standing in front of my bathroom mirror, putting on my lipstick, that coral pink shade I'd worn for 20 years, when I felt a sharp pain in my head, like someone had driven a nail straight through my skull. The room started spinning, my vision went fuzzy, and then nothing. Complete darkness. I woke up in the hospital 3 days later. The doctor, a young man who looked barely old enough to be out of high school, explained what had happened with that careful, gentle voice medical professionals use when they're delivering life-changing news. Mrs. Williams, you've suffered a stroke, a brain hemorrhage. You're very young for this type of event, but stress can be a significant contributing factor. The good news is that you're alive and alert. The challenging news is that there's been some damage to your motor functions and speech capabilities. The left side of my body was completely numb, sweethearts. I couldn't move my left arm or leg properly. My speech was slurred and difficult, like my tongue had forgotten how to form words correctly. I needed help for everything. Bathing, dressing, even eating required assistance because I couldn't coordinate both hands anymore. The hospital social worker, a kind woman named Patricia, came to talk to me about discharge planning. Do you have family who can help care for you at home? Living alone won't be safe in your current condition. We can arrange for home health services, but you'll need someone to coordinate your care and provide supervision. That's when James Jr. appeared like a knight in shining armor, or so I thought at the time. He'd driven down from Atlanta as soon as the hospital called him, bringing flowers and wearing his most concerned expression. He sat beside my hospital bed holding my good hand, his face the picture of a devoted son worried. "Don't worry about anything, Mama," he said, his voice thick with what sounded like genuine emotion. "I'm going to take care of you. I've already called my boss and arranged for extended leave. I'm moving back home to help you recover. We're going to get through this together." The social worker beamed at him. "How wonderful that you have such a caring son. Family caregivers often provide the best outcomes for stroke recovery. Your mother is very fortunate." James Jr. insisted he would take care of me properly. He said nursing homes were terrible places where elderly people were neglected and mistreated, that only family could provide the kind of loving care I needed. He spoke with such authority, such conviction, that everyone believed he was making a noble sacrifice to help his disabled mother. "Those facilities are just warehouse people," he told the discharge planning team. "My mother deserves better than that. She spent her whole life taking care of me, and now it's my turn to take care of her. I've done extensive research on stroke recovery, and I know exactly what she needs." I was so grateful, so incredibly relieved that I wouldn't have to face this terrifying new reality alone. My son, my beautiful boy who I'd raised to be a good man, was going to help me through the worst crisis of my life. Everyone at the hospital praised him for his dedication, his selflessness, his obvious love for his mother. The rehabilitation therapist gave him detailed instructions about my care needs. Physical therapy exercises, medication schedules, warning signs to watch for. She explained how to help me with mobility, how to encourage my speech recovery, how to maintain my dignity while providing necessary assistance. Recovery from stroke can be a long process, she explained to both of us. With proper care and consistent therapy, many patients regain significant function. The key is patience, encouragement, and maintaining as much independence as possible while ensuring safety. James Jr. nodded seriously, taking notes like the devoted caregiver he appeared to be. I want to do everything right. My mother deserves the best possible care. When we got home to my little house on Maple Street, the house where I'd raised him with such love and sacrifice, he immediately set about rearranging everything. He moved my bedroom downstairs to the den so I wouldn't have to navigate stairs. He installed grab bars in the bathroom and shower. He organized my medications in a daily pill dispenser. From the outside it looked like perfect caregiving. But she thought she was blessed to have such a caring son. How could she know what was really in his mind? The first few weeks seemed normal, or as normal as life can be when you're relearning how to exist in a body that no longer obeys your commands. James Jr. helped me with physical therapy exercises, drove me to medical appointments, cooked simple meals that I could manage to eat with one functioning hand. He was patient with my speech difficulties, never making me feel stupid or frustrated when I couldn't find the right words. But gradually, things started to change in ways that made me uncomfortable but that I couldn't quite name. When the home health aide came for her initial assessment, James Jr. met her at the door and explained that we wouldn't be needing her services after all. I've done extensive research on stroke care, he told her with that confident smile that had charmed teachers and employers for years. My mother needs specialized attention that only family can provide. We appreciate the offer, but we'll be handling her care privately. When my friend Betty from church called to arrange a visit, James Jr. answered the phone and explained that I was sleeping because of strong medication, and that the doctor had recommended absolute rest. When Pastor Morrison came by to check on me, James Jr. met him at the door and said I was having a particularly difficult day, that visitors were too overwhelming in my current condition. You understand, he told everyone who tried to visit. Recovery from stroke requires a very controlled environment. Too much stimulation can actually set back the healing process. The doctor has been very specific about limiting visitors until she's stronger. Slowly, all my friends from church stopped coming. My neighbors stopped checking on me. Even my own cousins were told I was too weak for family visits. James Jr. became my only connection to the outside world, my only source of information about what was happening beyond the walls of my own house. I started to feel like I was disappearing, like I was becoming invisible even to myself. The woman who had worked for 46 years, who had raised a son, who had been part of a community, was fading away until all that was left was a disabled body that needed constant care and supervision. James Jr. told everyone that I needed special care, that only he knew how to do it right. He would answer the door when anyone came by and explain that I was resting, that the medication made me confused and disoriented, that visitors would only upset me. People started to see him as this wonderful, sacrificial son who had given up his career to care for his disabled mother. Not many young men would make that kind of sacrifice, I heard Mrs. Peterson tell Mrs. Johnson over the fence. That boy is a saint for what he's doing for his mama. But behind closed doors, when there were no witnesses to his sainthood, James Jr. was becoming someone I didn't recognize. Someone who frightened me in ways I couldn't admit even to myself. The first time something happened that made my skin crawl, I told myself I was imagining things. Stroke can affect your thinking, make you confused and paranoid, and I thought maybe that's what was happening to me. Maybe my damaged brain was misinterpreting normal caregiving as something sinister. He said he had researched online about care for stroke patients, and that specialized websites recommended thorough cleaning and massage therapy to prevent bed sores and maintain circulation. He spoke with such medical authority, using terms he'd obviously looked up, explaining how important it was for my recovery that I receive proper physical care. The rehabilitation specialist emphasized the importance of maintaining muscle tone and preventing contractures, he'd say while helping me bathe. These therapeutic techniques are specifically designed for stroke patients who can't care for themselves properly. But the way he touched me during these therapeutic sessions felt wrong, felt different from the clinical touch of the nurses at the hospital. His hands would linger in places that didn't need cleaning. His voice would change to something softer and more intimate than a son should use with his mother. I tried to speak up, tried to say that I was uncomfortable, but my speech was still so difficult that the words came out slurred and unclear. When I managed to express that something didn't feel right, he'd look at me with this expression of hurt and disappointment. "Mama, I'm trying to help you. The doctor said you might have confusion and paranoia as side effects from the stroke. You're not thinking clearly right now. I'm your son. I would never do anything to hurt you. I'm sacrificing my whole life to take care of you." And I'd feel guilty for questioning him, for doubting the son who had given up his career to help me recover. Maybe I was confused. Maybe my damaged brain was making me suspicious of innocent caregiving. Maybe this was just what it felt like to be dependent on someone else for the most basic human needs. She was trapped inside her own body, seeing and feeling everything but unable to react. Her speech was still difficult, and who would believe her anyway? He had positioned himself as the devoted caregiver, the sacrificial son, while she was just a disabled woman who might be experiencing stroke-related confusion. James Jr. controlled every aspect of my life now. The visits I could receive, the medicine I took, even the programs I watched on television. When I tried to call church friends, he'd explain that the phone was too complicated for me to use safely, that I might accidentally call emergency services or get confused about numbers. "It's for your own protection, Mama. You don't want to embarrass yourself by calling people and not making sense. Let me handle all the communication until your speech improves." He convinced my doctor to increase my anti-anxiety medication, explaining that I was having episodes of paranoia and agitation that were interfering with my recovery. The higher dosage made me drowsy and compliant, less able to think clearly about what was happening to me. When I tried to express discomfort during his care sessions, he'd remind me that everyone saw him as the devoted son who had sacrificed his life to care for his disabled mother. Who would believe a stroke victim against her caregiver? Who would take the word of a confused old woman over a respected young man who had given up everything to help her? "If you make trouble for me," he'd say quietly while performing his so-called therapeutic massage, "they'll put you in a nursing home where you'll rot away with strangers who don't care if you live or die. Is that what you want? To spend your last years being neglected by people who see you as just another burden?" The threat of the nursing home was constantly hanging over my head, sweethearts. I'd heard the horror stories about those places. Patients left sitting in their own waste, medicine neglected, families that visited once and then forgot their elderly relatives existed. James Jr. painted vivid pictures of what my life would be like if I couldn't be managed at home. "You're lucky I'm willing to do this," he'd tell me when I showed any resistance to his care. "Most sons would have dumped you in a facility the day you had your stroke. Most people would say you're not my responsibility anymore, that I've done enough by visiting you once a week." He controlled my medication, doling out pills according to his schedule rather than the doctor's instructions. If I had a good day, if I seemed more alert and questioning, suddenly I'd need an extra dose of something to help with anxiety. If I tried to stay awake during visiting hours so I could talk to anyone who might stop by, I'd find myself inexplicably drowsy from medication that was necessary for my recovery. The financial abuse started gradually, almost invisibly. James Jr. explained that he needed access to my accounts to pay my bills and manage my affairs since I could no longer handle money properly. He had me sign papers giving him power of attorney, explaining that it was just a formality to make sure my needs were met. "Someone has to pay the electric bill and buy groceries," he'd say reasonably. You can't even write a check with your left hand paralyzed. This is just practical, Mama. I'm not taking anything. I'm making sure you're taken care of. But my savings account started shrinking faster than medical expenses could explain. When I asked about it, he'd show me receipts for my care, expensive supplements that were necessary for stroke recovery, special equipment that insurance didn't cover, modifications to the house that were required for my safety. Any woman who has felt powerless will recognize the courage it took just to survive each day. When you're completely dependent on someone for your most basic needs, when your own body has betrayed you and left you helpless, when the person controlling your life has convinced everyone that they're your savior rather than your captor, resistance becomes almost impossible. The worst part wasn't even the physical violations, sweethearts. It was psychological warfare, the constant messages that I was worthless, that I was a burden, that I should be grateful for any attention at all. He'd tell me that my stroke had been caused by my own poor choices, my stressful lifestyle, and my failure to take care of myself properly. This is what happens when you work yourself to death for other people, he'd say while forcing me to accept his therapeutic care. You burned yourself out trying to be some kind of martyr, and now look where it got you. You're completely dependent on me for everything. He convinced me that my suspicions were symptoms of mental illness, that questioning his care was evidence of the paranoia that sometimes affected stroke patients. Every time I tried to express discomfort or ask for different arrangements, he'd write it down in a notebook that he claimed was for the doctor. I have to document these episodes for your medical team, he'd explain with fake concern. The paranoid delusions are getting worse. We might need to adjust your medication again. The isolation was complete and carefully maintained. He'd scheduled my medical appointments when he knew my church friends would be working. He'd tell visitors that I was sleeping during times when I was actually alert and desperate for company. He'd answer my phone and explain that I was having a bad day. That conversation was too tiring for me. Slowly, people stopped trying to visit. They believed his updates about my condition, accepted his explanations about why I couldn't come to the phone, and trusted his assurances that I was receiving excellent care. I became invisible to everyone who had ever cared about me, existing only in the controlled environment he created. No one really cares about you except me, he'd tell me during those long afternoons when the house was empty and quiet. Everyone else has moved on with their lives. I'm the only one who bothers to check on you anymore. You should be grateful instead of making things difficult. He was right about one thing. I was completely dependent on him for everything. Food, medication, contact with the outside world, even basic hygiene. If I angered him, if I resisted his care, life became even more miserable. Meals would be late or forgotten. Medicine would be delayed. I'd be left sitting in discomfort for hours while he attended to other things. Caring for an invalid is exhausting work, he'd explain when I complained about being neglected. Sometimes I need breaks to keep from burning out completely. You wouldn't want me to collapse from the stress of taking care of you, would you? The gaslighting was constant and sophisticated, sweethearts. Every normal human reaction I had to being violated and controlled was reframed as evidence of my mental illness. Every attempt to seek help was characterized as confusion or ingratitude. Every expression of discomfort was documented as a symptom that needed to be treated with more medication or stricter supervision. I started to question my own reality, to wonder if maybe I was losing my mind along with my physical abilities. Maybe this was just what stroke recovery looked like. Maybe I was imagining things that weren't really happening. Maybe I should be grateful that anyone was willing to take care of a broken-down old woman like me. But sometimes when we think all is lost, help comes from the most unexpected places. Sometimes a single moment of witness, a glimpse behind the mask, can change everything. Sometimes the courage we thought we'd lost forever surfaces at exactly the moment we need it most. What happened next would prove that even when you feel completely powerless, even when the whole world seems to be against you, truth has a way of surfacing. Justice might be delayed, but it doesn't disappear forever. Mrs. Johnson was home sick that day, at a time when she would normally be working her shift at the county clerk's office. She'd been my neighbor for 15 years, had brought casseroles when I was recovering from surgery, had borrowed cups of sugar and returned the favor with homemade cookies. She was the kind of neighbor who noticed things. When your newspaper wasn't picked up, when your porch light was left on during the day, when something just didn't seem right. That Tuesday morning in November, she was home with a stomach bug that had kept her awake all night. She was sitting in her kitchen with a cup of tea, looking out the window that faced my house, when she heard the screams. Not the kind of screams that come from physical therapy or medical procedures, but something else entirely. Something desperate and terrified that made her blood run cold. She told me later that she'd been concerned about me for weeks, that she'd noticed how I never seemed to be by the windows anymore, how James Jr. always seemed to be the only one coming and going from the house. I kept meaning to stop by and check on you, she said later, but every time I called or came to the door, your son would tell me you were sleeping or having a bad day. He was always so polite, so concerned, but something about it felt wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it, but my gut kept telling me something wasn't right. When she heard those screams that Tuesday morning, she didn't hesitate. She called 911 first. Then she came straight over and walked right into my house through the unlocked back door. What she found in my bedroom changed everything. James Jr. was so focused on what he was doing to me, so confident in his power and control, that he didn't hear her come in. She found me on my bed, unable to move or speak clearly, while my own son violated every boundary that should exist between a parent and child. She immediately realized something was very wrong, especially because of that desperate look in my eyes when I saw her. "What are you doing to your mother?" she demanded, her voice shaking with shock and anger. James Jr. spun around, his face cycling through surprise, anger, and then that smooth, practiced innocence he'd perfected over the years. "Mrs. Johnson, thank goodness you're here. Mama's having one of her episodes. She gets confused and agitated, and sometimes she resists the medical care she needs. I was just trying to help her with her therapeutic massage." But Mrs. Johnson wasn't buying it. She'd raised 4 children, worked with the public for 30 years, and she could recognize lies when she heard them. More importantly, she could see the terror and shame in my eyes, the way I was trying to cover myself, the way my whole body was shaking. "Martha, honey, are you okay? Do you want this man in your room right now?" I managed to shake my head no, tears streaming down my face. For the first time in months, someone was asking what I wanted. Someone was seeing me as a person with rights and feelings instead of just a body that needed managing. The paramedics arrived within minutes, followed by the police. James Jr. immediately switched into his devoted caregiver performance, explaining to the first responders that I was a stroke patient who suffered from confusion and paranoia, that I often became agitated during necessary medical care. "She doesn't always understand what's happening," he told them with that concerned, patient voice he'd perfected. "The stroke affected her cognitive function, and sometimes she misinterprets normal caregiving procedures. I've been documenting these episodes for her doctor." But Mrs. Johnson stood her ground. "Officer, I know what I saw. This wasn't medical care. This was something else entirely, and that woman was clearly distressed. Look at her. Does she look like someone who's receiving proper care?" And they did look at me, really look at me for the first time in months. They saw a woman who was severely underweight, who flinched when her son tried to touch her, who had stress marks and signs of neglect despite supposedly receiving round-the-clock care. They saw the fear in my eyes, the way I couldn't stop shaking, the desperate way I reached for Mrs. Johnson's hand. The paramedic, a woman named Susan who had kind eyes and a gentle voice, knelt beside my bed and spoke directly to me. "Mrs. Williams, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want you to answer as best you can. Are you in pain right now?" I nodded yes. "Are you afraid of someone in this house?" I looked at James Jr., then back at her, and nodded again. "Do you want to go to the hospital where we can examine you properly and make sure you're safe?" This time I nodded so hard I made myself dizzy. Yes, I wanted to go anywhere that wasn't this house, anywhere that James Jr. couldn't control every aspect of my existence. At the hospital, everything I'd been unable to say for months finally came pouring out. The doctor who examined me was a woman named Dr. Sarah Mitchell, and she found signs of very high stress for someone supposedly being well cared for at home. My blood pressure was dangerously high, I was severely underweight, and I had physical signs that suggested I'd been subjected to inappropriate handling. "Mrs. Williams," Dr. Mitchell said gently, "I need to ask you some difficult questions, and I want you to know that anything you tell me will be kept confidential unless you want us to take action. Has someone in your family been hurting you?" When they asked if someone in my family was hurting me, I managed to nod yes. For the first time in months, someone was listening to me, believing me, treating me like a human being whose words mattered. The social worker who came to interview me was a woman named Patricia Reynolds, and she had experience with elder abuse cases. She explained that what I was describing wasn't unusual, that adult children sometimes use their caregiving role to exploit and abuse elderly parents, especially when those parents were isolated and dependent. "It's not your fault," she told me firmly. "You trusted your son because that's what parents do. He used that trust against you, and that makes him the criminal, not you the victim." The hardest part was admitting to myself that the son I'd raised with such love and sacrifice, the boy I'd worked double shifts to put through college, had deliberately chosen to hurt me. It wasn't confusion or misunderstanding or stroke-related paranoia. It was calculated abuse by someone who knew exactly what he was doing. When the police interviewed James Jr., he maintained his story about being a devoted caregiver dealing with a confused and paranoid stroke patient. He had documentation of my episodes. He had research about stroke-related behavioral changes. He had a carefully constructed narrative about his sacrifice and dedication. But the forensic examination confirmed everything I'd tried to tell them. The medical evidence was undeniable, and when confronted with the results, James Jr. could no longer maintain that facade of a devoted son. His lawyer advised him to accept a plea deal rather than face a jury trial with the evidence against him. For the first time in months, someone believed me. Someone was finally going to hold him accountable for what he'd done to the mother who had loved him unconditionally. The day he was arrested, sitting in that courthouse watching him in handcuffs, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Relief. Not happiness, not satisfaction, just pure relief that the nightmare was finally over, that someone else could see the truth I'd been carrying alone. If you've ever felt like your voice didn't matter, like no one would believe your story, please know that there are people who will listen. There are professionals trained to recognize abuse, to see through the lies that predators tell, to fight for victims who can't fight for themselves. Sarah appeared in my hospital room like a miracle I didn't know I needed. Sarah Thompson, my second cousin from my daddy's side. Someone I hadn't spoken to in 20 years but who had driven 3 hours from Macon when she heard about my situation through the family grapevine. "Martha, honey," she said, settling into the chair beside my bed like she planned to stay a while. "I know we haven't kept in touch like we should have, but when I heard what that boy did to you, I couldn't sit at home and do nothing. You're family, and family doesn't abandon family when they need help most." Sarah was 62, a retired schoolteacher who'd never married, never had children of her own. She'd spent 40 years teaching second grade, helping other people's children learn to read and write and believe in themselves. Now she was offering to help me learn how to live again. "I've got a big old house in Macon with plenty of room," she told me. "I've already talked to the doctors about transferring your care down there. There's a good rehabilitation hospital, and I've got time and energy to help you get back on your feet properly." The difference between Sarah's care and what I'd experienced with James Jr. was like night and day, sweethearts. Sarah treated me like a human being with opinions and preferences and rights. She asked what I wanted for breakfast instead of just bringing me whatever was convenient. She encouraged me to make phone calls to old friends instead of cutting me off from everyone who cared about me. "Recovery isn't something that happens to you," she'd tell me during those early weeks in Macon. "Recovery is something you do, with help from people who believe in your strength. You've got to be an active participant in getting your life back." Melissa Rodriguez was the physical therapist assigned to my case, and she became more than just a medical professional. She became my confidant, helping me understand that none of what had happened was my fault. Melissa had worked with abuse survivors before, and she understood the psychological healing that had to happen alongside the physical recovery. "Your son used your vulnerability against you," she explained during one of our sessions. He took advantage of your stroke, your dependency, your love for him. That's not a reflection of your weakness. It's evidence of his calculated cruelty. The physical therapy was challenging, but for the first time since my stroke, I was working with someone who believed in my ability to get stronger. Instead of being told I needed help with everything, I was being encouraged to push my limits, to rebuild my strength and independence. Walking alone again changed everything in my life, sweethearts. When I took my first independent steps down Sarah's hallway, when I could go to the bathroom without asking for help, when I could get a glass of water whenever I was thirsty instead of waiting for someone else to decide I needed it, that was freedom in its purest form. Speech therapy helped me find my voice again, literally and figuratively. As my words became clearer, as I could express myself without struggling for every syllable, I started to remember who I'd been before the stroke, before the abuse, before I'd lost myself in the role of helpless victim. The counselor Sarah found for me was a woman named Dr. Patricia Williams. Again, no relation, just happened to have the same name, who specialized in trauma recovery for elder abuse survivors. She helped me understand something crucial. Loving someone doesn't give them the right to hurt you, even if that someone is your own child. Parental love doesn't create an obligation to accept abuse, Dr. Williams explained during one of our sessions. You can love your son and still refuse to allow him to hurt you. You can grieve for the child he used to be while protecting yourself from the man he became. Helping other elderly people who'd been abused by their own children became my mission, my purpose, my way of making sure that something good came from all the pain I'd endured. I started volunteering with the Elder Abuse Prevention Program in Macon, sharing my story with other survivors, helping them understand that they weren't alone and it wasn't their fault. The shame was the hardest part to overcome, sweethearts. The feeling that somehow I'd failed as a mother, that I'd raised a child capable of such cruelty. Dr. Williams helped me understand that I'd raised a child with love and sacrifice, and what he chose to do with that love was his decision, not a reflection of my parenting. You gave him every opportunity to become a good man, she reminded me repeatedly. You sacrificed for his education, his opportunities, his future. He chose to use those gifts to become someone who hurts vulnerable people. That choice belongs to him, not to you. I learned that my case had helped change laws about elder abuse in Georgia. The prosecutor used my situation as an example of how adult children could exploit caregiving relationships, how the system needed better protections for vulnerable seniors. New laws were passed requiring background checks for family caregivers receiving state assistance, mandatory reporting requirements for healthcare workers, and better training for police officers responding to elder abuse calls. Your courage in speaking up probably saved other elderly people from going through what you experienced, the prosecutor told me after James Jr. sentencing. Your willingness to testify, to tell your story publicly, that's going to protect people you'll never meet. The support group I joined was filled with other parents who'd been betrayed by their own children, and we helped each other heal from wounds that seemed impossible to overcome. There was Eleanor, whose daughter had stolen her entire retirement savings. There was Robert, whose son had physically assaulted him when he tried to change his will. There was Frances, whose daughter had isolated her from friends and family for 3 years before a neighbor intervened. We all thought we were alone, Eleanor said during one of our meetings. We all thought we were the only ones this had happened to, the only ones whose children could be so cruel. Finding each other, knowing we're not alone, that's been healing in ways I never expected. I learned that family isn't just blood, sweethearts. The people who truly care about you prove it through actions, not just words. Sarah became more family to me than the son I'd raised ever was. The other survivors in my support group became sisters who understood my pain in ways that lifelong friends couldn't. The financial recovery took longer than the physical healing. James Jr. had spent most of my savings on things that had nothing to do with my care. But with Sarah's help, I applied for victim compensation funds, pursued civil remedies, and eventually recovered enough to feel secure again. Money isn't the most important thing, Sarah would tell me when I worried about being a burden. But having enough to feel safe, to have choices about your future, that's important for your healing. You worked for 46 years. You deserve to have that security back. At 73, I moved into a senior living community here in Macon where I have my own apartment but access to help if I need it. I chose this place, I toured the facilities, and I interviewed the staff. For the first time since my stroke, I was making decisions about my own life instead of having decisions made for me. The community here is wonderful, filled with people who've lived full lives and have stories to tell. I help coordinate the speaker series, where we bring in experts to talk about everything from financial planning to health and wellness. I also help run the support group for abuse survivors, sharing resources and hope with people who thought their situations were hopeless. I learned to set boundaries, to say no without feeling guilty, to trust my instincts when something doesn't feel right. These skills came too late to protect me from James Jr., but they've helped me build healthy relationships with the people in my life now. You survived something that could have broken you completely, Dr. Williams told me during our final session. You found the courage to speak up when it would have been easier to stay silent. You rebuilt your life from nothing. That's not just survival, that's triumph. The friends I've made here in Macon, the work I do with other survivors, the peaceful evenings I spend reading in my own apartment where no one controls what I watch or when I eat or who I can talk to. This is what freedom looks like. This is what it means to reclaim your life after someone has tried to destroy it. If you're watching this and you're in a situation where someone is using your love against you, where someone is controlling your life under the guise of helping you, please know that there are people who will believe you. There are resources available, there are laws to protect you, there are communities of survivors who will welcome you with open arms. 5 years later, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in March, there was a knock at my apartment door. I looked through the peephole and saw a man I barely recognized, thin, sallow-skinned, walking with obvious difficulty. It took me a moment to realize it was James Jr., the son I'd given birth to 54 years earlier. He'd been released from prison the month before, after serving his reduced sentence. I'd known this day might come, had prepared for it with Dr. Williams and my support group, but actually seeing him standing at my door still took my breath away. "Mama," he said through the door, his voice weaker than I remembered. "I need to talk to you. I need your help." The irony wasn't lost on me, sweethearts. Here was a man who had controlled every aspect of my life when I was vulnerable, who had used my love and trust to hurt me in unimaginable ways, now standing at my door asking for help. The tables had turned completely. He was the one who needed care now, and I was the one with the power to choose. I opened the door but kept the chain on, looking at him through the gap. Prison and addiction had aged him 20 years in 5. He looked like an old man, though he was only 47. His hands were shaking, his clothes hung loose on his thin frame, and his eyes had that desperate look of someone who'd lost everything. "I'm sick, Mama," he said, and I could hear him starting to cry. "I've got hepatitis from drug use in prison, and I don't have anywhere to go. I know I hurt you, I know I did terrible things, but you're the only family I have left. I need help, and I don't know where else to turn." For just a moment, I felt that old familiar pull of maternal instinct, the desire to help a child in need even when that child had caused nothing but pain. For 47 years, I'd been programmed to put his needs before my own, to sacrifice my well-being for his benefit. But then I remembered the months of abuse, the isolation, the violation of every boundary that should exist between parent and child. I remembered the terror I'd felt, the way he'd used my love against me, the calculated cruelty he'd shown to the woman who'd sacrificed everything for his future. I looked at him with the calm certainty that comes from years of therapy and the support of people who truly care about my well-being. "The son I raised with love died a long time ago," I told him quietly. "What's standing in front of me is a stranger who once did me great harm. I wish you well, but I cannot and will not help you." "Please, Mama," he begged, his voice getting louder, more desperate. "I know I made mistakes, but I'm your son. You can't just abandon me when I need you most. You raised me to be a good person. This isn't who I really am." "No," I said firmly. "I raised you to be a good person, but you chose to become someone who hurts vulnerable people. You chose to use my stroke, my dependency, my love for you as weapons against me. Those weren't mistakes. They were choices. And now I'm making my choice." The manipulation tactics were still there, even in his weakened state. He tried guilt, reminding me of all the sacrifices I'd made for him as a child. He tried religious obligation, saying that forgiveness was Christian duty. He tried family loyalty, insisting that blood was thicker than water. But I'd learned something important in those 5 years of healing. Forgiveness doesn't require endangering yourself. Love doesn't mean accepting abuse. Being a good Christian doesn't mean letting evil people continue to hurt you. I forgive you, I told him through that gap in the door. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen. And it definitely doesn't mean giving you another opportunity to hurt me. Security arrived. I'd pressed the button on the pendant I wore, the one that connected me to help 24 hours a day. They escorted him from the building while he continued to plead and cry and promise he'd changed. I closed the door, locked it, and sat in my comfortable chair by the window. I felt sad for the child he'd once been, the little boy I'd loved so much. But I felt proud of the woman I'd become, the survivor who could protect herself, who could choose safety over sentiment. The next morning I called my support group friends to let them know what had happened. Their response was immediate and loving. They were proud of me for maintaining my boundaries, for choosing my safety over the guilt and obligation that had controlled so much of my life. That took incredible strength, Eleanor told me. 5 years ago you might have let him back in. Today you protected yourself. That's growth, that's healing, that's what victory looks like. Today, at 78 years old, I can say with certainty that I am a complete and fulfilled woman. I survived my own child's betrayal and built a life worth living. I have friends who truly care about me, meaningful work helping other survivors, and the peace that comes from knowing I'll never again allow someone to use my love against me. I live in my own space, make my own decisions, choose who gets access to my time and energy. I have morning coffee with friends who respect my boundaries, afternoon activities that bring me joy, and evening phone calls with people who care about my well-being without expecting anything in return. The work I do with other elder abuse survivors continues to be the most meaningful part of my life. Just last week, I helped a woman named Dorothy recognize that her grandson was financially exploiting her. The week before, I sat with a man named Charles while he filed a police report against the daughter who'd been stealing his Social Security checks. "You give us hope," Dorothy told me after she'd successfully removed her grandson from her accounts. "Seeing that you survived, that you rebuilt your life, that you found happiness again, it helps us believe we can do it too. No matter how old you are, no matter how many traumas you've suffered at the hands of your own children, it's always possible to start over and find people who will truly love and respect you. Family isn't just about blood. It's about people who prove their love through consistent kindness, respect, and care for your well-being." If this story has helped you recognize abuse in your own life, if it's given you courage to speak up or seek help, I want you to know that you're not alone. There are resources available, there are people who will believe you, there are communities of survivors who will welcome you and support your healing. Share this story with someone who might need to hear it. Help other survivors know that recovery is possible, that justice can come even when it's delayed, that it's never too late to choose safety over sentiment. Your voice matters, your story matters, and your healing matters. The most important thing I've learned is this. You can love someone and still refuse to let them hurt you. You can grieve for who they used to be while protecting yourself from who they've become. You can choose healing over history, safety over sentiment, truth over tradition. That choice, sweethearts, that's where real freedom begins. That's where a new life starts, even at 78 years old. That's where hope lives, even after the worst betrayal imaginable. And if an old woman like me can find the courage to start over, so can you. Thank you for listening to my story, and for giving me the courage to share it with the world. Until next time, choose yourself, choose safety, and choose the people who prove their love through their actions.